What is SisterSong? Many of you have probably not heard of SisterSong. We're a national coalition of more than 80 women of color and allied organizations founded in 1997. We at first started only working with women of color who were in organizations. And then we finally and quickly kind of realized that there were more women of color not in women of color organizations than in women of color organizations. Like there are more women of color working for Planned Parenthood, for example, than working within autonomous women of color organizations. So in 2003, we opened up our ranks to include individual women of color as well as allied organizations, organizations that work on behalf of women of color, even if they weren't founded as women of color organizations. And also in 2003, we added men to the mix. So there's SisterSong, now there's Brother Beat. Um, yeah, my dirty mind would not have chosen that name. This is what the men chose, so we live with it. Self-determination is a good value. I have to work hard to keep my mind out the gutter. Apologies, Reverend. Anyway, and then we expanded even the categories. So in addition to adding white women to SisterSong, we added Middle Eastern women, North African women. We talk about separating out Afro-Caribbean and Afro-Latino women from African-American women. So right now we're like a mix of everybody in SisterSong. And I think that we grew largely because we offered a radical progressive analysis that turned out to be really attractive to people. We weren't just talking about let's come together because we are women of color. We were offering a transformative analysis that's called reproductive justice that I will be talking about. What we have learned as women of color is that you're born biologically whatever you're born. You're Afro-American, Afro-Caribbean, Latino, Venezuelan, whatever. You choose to become a woman of color when you choose to work in solidarity with other oppressed women. Okay, so it is not a biological destination, it is a political acceptance. Okay, and so people can choose not to be identified as women of color because they're choosing not to be in that particular solidarity arrangement. Because it is so empowering for people to claim identities, but also to very consciously not appropriate each other's culture. What I like is that our processes give us a chance to actually talk to each other, woman to woman, crossing up these cultures, sharing learning about each other's cultures in a way that's respectful and healthy. But it also gives us a safe space to say, you're messing up. You should not do that anymore. We first of all believe that as women of color, we have the right to have children, which is not always a given in a white supremacist society, okay? So we have to fight for the right to have children. But we also join the larger pro-choice movement in fighting for the right not to have children. So even though we have this diversity of opinion within SisterSong, we took a vote and we decided that we were officially pro-choice with a minority position. And we believe that people should have a right to practice abortion, terminate a pregnancy, use birth control, or abstain if you can hold on. I mean, whatever works for you. What I say, whatever floats your balloon. But we also recognize, and this is our third core reproductive justice principle, and that is we also, as women of color, have to fight for the right to parent the children that we have, because our right to parent our children is constantly interfered with. I mean, our kids are tracked out of schools into jail so fast, often the parents aren't notified that this is happening. The foster care system discriminates against us. The immigration authorities don't care if they're jerking a mother away from a 5-month-old baby and deporting her back. And I mean, they just do all these very, very unjust things to communities of color that interfere with our right to parent. Something that is taken for granted in the mainstream community, we have to fight for every day. And so the right to have a child, not to have a child, and to parent our children are our core values that we started with in 1997. There, of course, are historical examples of reproductive oppression that we point out. The forced breeding of African American women during slavery, of course, stands without comment. Though I have to say that in today's society, when you have so many right-wingers claiming that abortion is black genocide, we tend to thwart their arguments by resurrecting the concept of forced breeding of African American women and arguing that you shall not re-enslave us to suit your political agenda. And generally that tends to make people who are leaning their way back up and say, oh, wait a moment. This is actually what that would mean. Sterilization abuse was rampant up until the mid-1970s, and it was a Native American woman named Connie Urey, who was a doctor, a Native doctor, who actually drew attention to the federal government's funding of sterilization abuse of indigenous women through the Indian Health Services. They used to call sterilizations, because they were so common, they used to call them Mississippi appendectomies. And it was very rampant in the Deep South to illegally sterilize black and Latina women. It was just, particularly Mexican American women. But Puerto Rican women in the 1950s were massively sterilized as well. There was a film made on Puerto Rican sterilization abuse called La Operación that I recommend. Dr. Helen Rodriguez-Trias helped produce this film that is very much available. Limiting access to fact-based and scientifically accurate sexual education information, I think, is a form of reproductive oppression. Restricting and criminalizing immigrants is a form of reproductive oppression. We are now seeing an increasing wave of incarceration of women for pregnancy behaviors, whether they are using drugs while they're pregnant, drinking while they're pregnant, or simply refusing to stay at home on bed rest while they're pregnant. And we are now finding doctors, of course, forcing unnecessary cesareans on women. The whole welfare reform process, welfare itself, even before it was reformed, was abusive of women's rights, let's be clear. But they made it even more destructive, and particularly they attached a population control angle to it by putting these family caps on. And y'all know what family caps are, limiting the number of children women who receive public assistance can get. And of course, federal policies against abortion, against all the restrictions attached to HIV/AIDS money, the global gag rule. Y'all know the story, right? This is not new information. So, we have learned to define this constellation of issues that I've talked about, like the immigration restrictions and the population control policies, as reproductive oppression. And so we have created this term so that we can have a more inclusive vision of what we're talking about. Here is its formal definition. Reproductive oppression is the control and exploitation of women, girls, and individuals. And we added the concept of individuals to recognize that it is inclusive. We wanted to make sure that we included transgendered individuals in our definition through our bodies, our sexuality, our labor, and our reproduction. What we find is that through reproductive oppression, you can control entire communities. Because if you control the ability of a community to have kids, to raise their kids, to parent their kids, you can control that whole community's destiny.